Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Michael and Florence have been quite the couple this fall. Two named storms that certainly have made a name for themselves. This is the most widely watched program on Carolina business policy and public affairs. Welcome again, I'm Chris William, and as we unpack this carnage and aftermath of the 2018 storm season's biggest offenders so far, we get a clearer picture on how widespread the effect is, but also a chance for us to debrief on the cleanup, et cetera, and just as importantly, what casualties are not so obvious and the biggest lessons learned. We'll dialogue with our panel in just a moment.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Adam Emmerich from the city of Conway, South Carolina. Stephen Still of New Hanover County Emergency Management. And Elizabeth Robinson, representing North Carolina's Business Emergency Operations Center.
Welcome to our program, gentlemen, welcome. Elizabeth, good to have you back.
Thank you, good to be back.
Not that it's not good to see you too, Adam and Stephen, but Elizabeth's been on the program. Elizabeth, I'll start with you. So the name storms, Michael and Florence, I mean, both of these were devastating to say the least. I don't want to minimize it or even trivialize it, but here we are a few weeks now, and not many weeks after both of these storms come roaring through the Carolinas, one way, the other one the other way, and big swath of damage. What do you think is important to remember now that these storms and the effect have kind of receded from the headlines?
Well, that's a great point. And I mean, I think it's important to remember that this is going to be a very long-term process as we look to recover, and not weeks and not months. We may be looking at years. We're still working on Matthew from a couple of years ago. And on the private sector side, I'm with the Retail Merchants Association, and we have a very unique role when storms hit like this, in that Director Sprayberry at Emergency Management and Persia Payne Hurley, they do a great job partnering with the private sector and trying to leverage all resources as best as possible to get communities back up and running. And we're relying on Adam and Stephen and all the boots on the ground, the people that are really at the front of it and very situationally aware of everything going on, relaying that to know how we can be of help, whether that be resource requests, donation requests, also trying to get trucks into areas to get essential goods into areas and get stores up and running so that there's a new sense of normalcy in those areas that have been hit the hardest.
Governor Cooper was on this program a couple months ago, before the storm season even hit, and one of the points we asked him about was the deployment of funds, whether passed through FEMA funds or just state funds, and getting that money down. He was very intentional about saying his priority was going to do that. North Carolina in the past, and even in Matthew, and I'm not trying to ask you to make a political statement, but even in Matthew, North Carolina was a bit slower than South Carolina in getting the funds to the ground to where it needed to be deployed. Do you get the sense now, watching these two storms in the aftermath, you get the sense that North Carolina is serious about getting that money down there as quickly as possible?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, we have seen, I think, incredible bipartisanship with this storm and the reaction to trying to get funds into those areas as quickly as possible. We just came through a special session where they initially have already allocated $400 million with others set aside, another $400 million set aside for those purposes. North Carolina in particular is very fortunate to have a $2 billion rainy day fund to be able to tap into for a lot of that. So I think we have seen really, really great response coming into this, but also a recognition that we're not done yet, that there's going to be a lot of coming back to address those needs.
When you drive to Myrtle Beach, you drive through what is called the Gateway City, and of course that's Conway, South Carolina. And Conway, surprisingly, Adam, ended up one of those cities that got hit what appeared to be the hardest.
Yeah, well, I won't take any credit for the hardest, but certainly we were hard hit. And the unique thing about the way that we were affected in this last storm with Hurricane Florence is we watched those 3.5 days of the just sitting over New Hanover County and over North Carolina, knowing that when that was over, that water all had to rush through our city. And that's, we had 5 days between when Hurricane Florence ended and when the flooding really started in earnest. And that's something unique that people don't understand about how when riverine flooding happens south of major storms, that's what we were at with Conway.
So it wasn't the event of the storm?
We had very little damage from the storm itself. We had some flash flooding within 24 hours of the storm ending, but it really was that 5-day later window when the river started cresting and flooding, and the crest took a week and a half to get to us. So we had 30 days basically of sustained flooding.
Did you get the sense, though, Adam, you get this, I mean, did residents of Conway and Horry County, at least that far inland, they get the sense that this thing was going to be, and this is my term, the antelope going through the python? This was going to be a big event.
I don't know that they understood at first. I don't know that they understood while the hurricane was here. We started seeing those forecasts of Hurricane Matthew was the old benchmark. It was the highest we've ever had for flooding in Conway. And our river's the Waccamaw River. It was at about 17.9 feet, which was the highest it had ever been. We were hearing estimations of it being at 22 feet with this storm. So 4 feet plus more than the old peak. And we ran some models, and it showed that neighborhoods that had never flooded, did not have flood insurance, had no expectation of flooding, were likely going to flood. And we went door to door in those neighborhoods and told people, you need to be prepared. We don't know what you're watching, what you're hearing, but we're preparing for 4 feet more of water in the city, and you need to take those same preparations. And they took it to heart. There were moving vans in every driveway in some neighborhoods. A really kind of a apocalyptic thing to see. You see it on TV when the meteor's coming with a commercial, and that's what we were seeing in some of our neighborhoods, where every single street had a moving van to move their possessions out before the flooding hit their house.
So I got to bring in this, Stephen. New Hanover County. I mean, bullseye. That was ground zero, and I don't want to overstate that. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, it made landfall in New Hanover County, right between Wrightsville Beach and Figure 8 Island. I'm fourth generation Wilmingtonian, so I hate to see that. I hate to see the bullseye being New Hanover County. Don't wish it on anybody else, but certainly wish it wasn't us. But it stayed over us for a period of 2 days. Generally storms, you'll have an evening or a day of duration of wind and rain. But we had one full day of wind and then 30 inches of rain on top of that.
Was that, not to overstate this, was that unprecedented for Wilmington, New Hanover County, Wrightsville? Yeah,
30 inches of rain, we have not seen that in any foreseeable time that I have a knowledge of. It's a mapped floodplain. We have an idea of which areas are going to flood, but when you're talking about 30 inches of rainfall, it goes well beyond that. We have a good partnership with the National Weather Service that ran some experimental models to try to figure out where we were going to have problems based on urbanization and inland flooding and poor drainage.
Right.
It was eye-opening.
So again, the question we asked Elizabeth on the opening of the program, what's being forgotten now, month past the event?
It's starting to become a blur. We had 16 days of 24-hour operation period. There was so much done prior to the storm, during the storm, and we're still in operations right now. And we're getting into the recovery process. And I guess really now, as we get into the recovery process, as we're doing a lot of after-action reviews, hot washes, there's a lot to be learned prior to the event, during the event, that we're trying to go back and capture that knowledge from the frontline workers to everybody up to the county manager and the elected leadership, so that we can learn from this event. There's a lot of things that we did right, and I don't want to put it in that position that lessons learned, but there are a lot of kernels that we can pull out.
Well,
of this.
like what? What are one or two things that you wouldn't have never thought about, but now are clear and present dangers that you need to plan for on the next tour?
That's a good question. I think there's two for us. Sheltering threw us for a loop. When we have events every year, tropical storm, hurricane, or some event every year, and we do extensive exercises with sheltering. With this event, we had unique differences pre-storm, during storm, and post-storm with sheltering, whether it's the state's plan, the coastal regional evacuation and sheltering, where we send folks out of the county for us, it was areas as far as Winston-Salem. That was unique for us to coordinate that activity, provide transportation to the location. In county, we opened up shelters of last resort, and they continuously got filled up. The next one we would open up, that got filled up. And so we had to reach out to the community and find structures that necessarily, there were school shelters that didn't have the considerations for temporary power. We had to do that on the fly. And then post-event, it was really, as we discussed earlier, the apartment complexes that sustained damage, that are terminating lease for their tenants, and they're moving them out of those places. So you have 500 individuals here, another 1,000 here, another 300 here. So the sheltering is going to continue for a while post-event.
And Adam, same question. I mean, what are the one or two biggest lessons learned? And not to create an academic discussion here, but what will you always remember and be now embraced in part of some emergency plan?
And I could even back up a minute. We had, in 2015, we had catastrophic flooding with Hurricane Joaquin. In 2016, we had catastrophic flooding with Matthew, and now with this, we had it again. So we have learned lessons in those last two storms, which are, I mean, we flooded 3 times in 4 years. One of the big things we learned was that exactly that. You knock on someone's door, you tell them they're going to flood, and people are starting to believe us. When the governor issues evacuation orders for the coast and scares everyone at the coast away, there's always this fear that if we evacuate unnecessarily, the next time people aren't going to want to leave. And that is a fear that you hear echoed every time there is one. And hopefully things like Michael and Florence and Wilmington prevent that from happening in almost every case. But what we have learned is that, when you go knock on someone's door and say, hey, you flooded last year, we've got a storm coming, you need to take precaution. And then a storm comes and it floods them again. And then this time we knocked on new doors and said, hey, this is coming. That's something we've learned in the last several events, that if you have notice and you can go and knock on someone's door, you're knocking on your children's kindergarten teacher's door, you're knocking on someone that might work for you's door, they believe you. And that's something that a lot of times I don't know that places, if you've got that knowledge, don't take the time to actually physically reach out to the people that are going to be most affected and give them the opportunity to protect themselves.
Elizabeth, the Business Emergency Operations Center, what are you debriefing in there? What are you talking about right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to echo Stephen's comment that I think it's not to say there's not a recognition that everybody was doing a phenomenal job, but there's always lessons learned, and how do we do it better? How do we do it faster? How do we communicate better? And one of the conversations we were having during Michael was, how can we collectively do a better job of tracking locally what's going on the ground and filtering that through the state EOC? Because one of the things we do for our retail members is try to track local declarations. So you have a state declaration, but then you have locals declaring states of emergency that sometimes include curfews and evacuation notices, sales restrictions. And for our members that want to be the best partner we can be and get in those communities and get those products, essential goods in, we want to do it in the safest way possible. And so as we find out about those, we try to tap into the State Highway Patrol and some of those folks to get safe routes, to find out when trucks can be on the road, to use the reentry certification system. And so the more information we have that we can all share, the better off everybody is. And so that was one of the big takeaways that, we feel like we can continue to try to grow and do better. But as there are needs assessments that come through, and to the point of sheltering, I think a lot of our retail members you've seen go above and beyond, trying to donate not only money, but also anything that might be helpful. There was recently a project announced, I think a partnership between FEMA and the Housing Finance Agency and furniture retailers donating furniture for a lot of these shelters or temporary housing that's going in place, so that they actually have something on the floor when they move in. But as we can think about those things from the front end and what spaces we might have available that might be able to be utilized in a situation. I think all of those are things that, you know, when we have quiet times, we can try to think through.
You know, it seemed like there was more. There was a lot more in-kind, but also partnerships that were willing. Business partnerships. Verizon. We're going to waive a fee. You're not going to be charged this at Target. At DHL, all of these services really stepped up. There seemed to be more of that going on. This coordinated partnership among business. Is that the truth, or is that anecdotal?
Well, I think absolutely, and you know, we've seen it even coming from Harvey and into Matthew, and I think that there's such a recognition from the retail standpoint of the critical role they play in their community and with their employees. We just had an example in Wilmington area of Best Buy paying their employees, even though they can't open their store. They're paying their employees to go out and work in the community to try to get things back up and running. And you know, even independent Piggly Wigglies, you know, they were trying to transport medical supplies by helicopter into areas. And I think that there's this sense of community that, you know, if we all do our part, we can kind of uplift the whole. So
you both are nodding as if you have stories about it. Stephen?
Oh, absolutely. In this storm, and in recent storms past, with the business community and the partnerships that we have with industry and businesses. Generally, they say, you know, what is government going to do for me? But in this case, it was truly, what can we provide for you? What are your critical needs? At one point during the storm, fuel was our hottest commodity, and it was the hardest thing to find because we were completely cut off. There was no transportation into New Hanover County. We probably had 98% of the structures, customers were without power. So everything was on generator. And those generators require constant fueling. And if you look at our Public Utility Authority, the emergency operations functions, communications, every single one of those thousands of generators need refuel. We'd requested from the state, and they ran into every roadblock known to man: flooded water, trees, lines down, and they kept getting churned back. Hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel truck just got sent back to Raleigh.
So all of this stuff comes on surface roads and not by pipeline.
Correct. Yeah, into New Hanover County. We do have a natural gas plant, but that got flooded during the storm. And so we reached out. We're very fortunate in New Hanover County instead of Wilmington to have the ports right there. And so we reached out to some terminals and said, hey, what do you have in your stores there? And they said, well, we have some challenges, but we worked with them and we were able to provide fuel to not only our critical facilities, but to our fleet and emergency responders. So that was a good partnership that, you know, we'd exchanged pleasantries prior to the storm, but during the storm they said, hey, what do you guys need? What can we provide
So the
for
Port
you?
of Wilmington had inventory fuel gas that you could burn, or fuel.
Yeah, they had, there's some terminals there, some fuel terminals, two separate ones. Okay. One unique challenge for us, and the governor really helped us out with us, is off-road diesel, dyed non-highway tax diesel. There was an abundance of it there that we can use for generators as long as they waive the restriction for our fleet vehicles and other vehicles to use. So he was really quick to help us with that, and we were able to make use of it.
Adam, the business, it was an interesting story I read in Conway that 25 businesses were affected directly.
With 3 to 4 feet of floodwater in their businesses.
So that doesn't seem like a lot, unless you're in that 25, of
right.
course, and I don't want to downplay that. But only 25 affected. But how does that change the arc of business, those businesses, and business development in Conway?
Certainly. Well, one of the reasons it's so small, it was such a small number that were directly affected, is because we've done a pretty good job of protecting our floodways from development. The areas that flood that routinely have homes in them, that's an older stock of homes built in the 40s, 50s, 60s. The commercial establishments that are our historic core were on an elevated bluff over the Waccamaw River, which is why they didn't flood. But you know, we want to continue to pursue development of our riverfront, and this really does throw a hurdle in that and a challenge in that on how to appropriately develop your riverfront, which is one of our best assets, in a way that won't be susceptible to floodwater. What really affected our business community more so than the flooding of those 25 businesses, and certainly I don't want to downplay the effect to them, but was the failure of our infrastructure during the flooding, as every road closed. Much like Stephen mentioned a minute ago, is we had between 75 and 100 road closures in a city of 25,000 people. Every road that was basically impassable that is a major road, except for 501 bypass, which is the primary artery to the beach.
Did that remain open?
It remained open in our 501 business, which goes over our 1937 bridge.
Right.
So we had two roads that basically took all traffic coming into the county to Myrtle Beach, which made absolute gridlock in all of Conway, in all directions. People couldn't get to their business to open their business. Customers couldn't get to their business to do any.
So it shuts
shopping.
the 25. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
So the 25 that were shut down because of the flooding affected all the other businesses because you shut down the city.
We shut down the city.
I'm sorry to get too detailed, but that old 1937 bridge that goes over a rail line, doesn't it?
Well, a rail line comes beside it. The rail line actually flooded in areas, which is something that doesn't happen. That's how bad the flooding was.
Let's go just for a minute. Let's spend some time on the business disruption. Stephen, and I promise I'm going to get you on this question because there's one I specifically want to pin you down on. How disruptive was it? How would you gauge the disruption to business and commerce? Besides the storm, besides the power outage, what's the long term?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a while to even assess the depth of the damage. We're still in operations at this point in time. Thankfully, everybody can get back into Wilmington. They can start that assessment. They can look at that inventory loss, the structure loss. And for the most part, we are back up and running. The critical functions, the critical businesses, the restaurants, the gas stations, all that's working. Commerce is flowing. But there's a lot to be done in the next couple of months to really, for one, with the employees, they were equally affected. That are probably displaced from their homes, their apartments, et cetera, getting their employees taken care of so they can come back to work. That's one of the issues that we're having now.
And if I can weigh in on that,
please.
We take 3 weeks out of a small business owner's till. Yeah. That's 3 weeks that they can't get back and they may never recover from.
Right.
So we're looking at, is the 25 that flooded, certainly they're going to have catastrophic loss. The rest of the city and a lot of the beach areas too, you take 3 weeks out of their economy, they may not make it through the off season and back into next season. And
Adam, should there be to that point? Should there be a special consideration and dispensation made to the businesses that directly were hit by it by some public funds, or? And I'm not asking you to make a political statement because I know that's probably a Horry County Commission debate or maybe state funds, but should there be some consideration?
I think there are some already programs out there for businesses that were affected by the flooding. I know the Small Business Association has a number of programs for disaster relief. A lot of those are in the form of a loan, which can become a burden on a lot of those businesses to be able to repay. And a lot of the businesses that needed those loans in 2016 that are still alive are still repaying those loans, and now they're in the same spot as again today. And that you start piling up those sort of things, and it becomes a real catastrophe for them.
Maybe it becomes a forgivable loan at some point. Elizabeth, so talking to economists here, the fourth quarter is very, very critical around retail sales. How much does a storm like this affect retail sales across the state? Certainly down east. But across the state, what would you think?
Well, I think that you're having a situation where you have businesses that are trying to get back up and running at the same time that they're still dealing with the losses that they may have suffered at their store as they are then trying to operate their business, which is a challenge. We have one of our great independent members, Russell Rhodes, who has a new sports shop in Kinston, and he has watched to the point made earlier. You have a 5-day forewarning that you're going to have 4 or 5 feet of water in your store. And he has it down to a science of putting in his entire store into the backs of 53-foot trucks to move it out and then actually bring it back in 7 days after the storm. But that takes a huge toll on trying to operate your business. You're trying to get those employees back to a sense of normalcy and keeping those folks paid. So it certainly has an effect, but at the same time, to your point, trying to focus in on you're getting ready to hit in fourth quarter. So it is definitely a challenge, but there's a resiliency there that folks are trying to do the best they can to get things back up and running and make sure that they take the fourth quarter as seriously as possible and have an opportunity to hopefully recap on some of that.
We have 2 minutes left. Do you think, gentlemen, and I know this is probably not going to be a popular question, but it needs to be asked, do you think this rips the Band-Aid off the debate about, well, if you're going to live in a resort area, as much as we all love Wrightsville and all the beaches, do public funds come back in where insurance can't cover? I'm not asking you to thumbs up or thumbs down on that question, but does it restart the dialogue?
I think it absolutely does. It has to. There's inherent challenges with living on the coast, for sure. I mean, for all the things that we have for us, the recreation, the tourism, there's hazards with that, with storms and floods. So I'm going to leave it at it should be a discussion.
Yeah. Adam, same
We're
question.
actually in the middle of a program right now to use public funds to buy out a number of homes that are in the flood area.
Is there any opposition to that?
I think there was at first, and I think that opposition is starting to wane.
Yeah.
You start to think about how much money you're spending to protect those homes and to rebuild those homes, and it becomes a question of at what point is it cheaper to buy them out and remove them from harm's way than it is to keep them there and continually react and continually rebuild and continually fund flood insurance programs for those folks. It becomes really a question of this is cheaper to buy them out and get them out of harm's way than it is to keep them there.
Yeah.
And that's not the right evaluation, being cheaper or not, but that is the evaluation that's there.
So I guess the lesson learned: if Jim Cantori or Mike Seidel show up in your town, you probably ought to be leaving town, right?
We had a good discussion about that earlier.
We did, absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, lady, thank you for your leadership. Thanks for being willing to talk about something that was very devastating. But it's nice to see you all, and please safe travel back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for watching us. If you have any questions or comments, please, carolinabusinessreview.org. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.